So welcome again to the Compassionate Capitalist podcast, and in this case, also the video cast. My guest today is Dean Trevelino of Trevelino Keller, and we're going to talk about 360 marketing, 360 reputation marketing. What does that mean within the context of entrepreneurs and investors when they're looking at the companies, their growth strategy, sustainability long-term, their role within a community. We're probably going to touch on lots of topics like, this whole idea of conscious capitalism, because that's the trust factor that you create with your employees, with your community, with your customers, and engagement. We're so fractured in our communications out there, in our media messaging, and the noise that companies have to cut through when they're trying to not only establish a brand, but also establish a relationship with their customers, and then convert that into sales. And then ultimately, we're going to get into the idea of goodwill and how that trust factor can create an additional level of value within the marketplace for a company when they get ready to create their exit strategy and produce that return on investors. We return for investors and return for the founders, in the whole reason why an entrepreneur creates a business, not just making money while you're in it, but making a lot of money when you exit it. So let me introduce Dean here and talk about our background, because Dean and I have gone back. We would try to reminisce a bit about it, but it's over 10 years that we have known each other within the startup community in Atlanta. And we were just kind of reminiscing, because he started his firm, and he'll tell us a little bit more about his journey on that. But they started in 2003 with his longtime colleague, Jenna Keller. And that's, of course, is the reason why the name is Trevelino Keller, and that's their domain name as well. So I visited their domain in preparation for this, and there's so much great information in there. And the blog is an excellent blog. You need to subscribe to their email list if you are interested in marketing strategies and techniques for your own company or for companies that you're working with. I highly recommend it. And so, they saw an opportunity to step out of the big corporate world and provide a direct impact to businesses, and as a result of their approach to it, and it's a fascinating story, because they, from this idea and this concept, which it's hard to differentiate when you're in public relations and media marketing, but they have gone on to become number 4 on some tallies, number 4th in the country, but second in many categories, just in a very recent assessment, and for all different industries. I think 9 different industries which you'll probably correct me here in just a second. And and so many of these companies that are, to you, a name brand, started with a program, or he first discovered it in a program how I came to know them, which is called Startup Council. So we're going to jump in on all of that here. And first I wanted to say, go ahead and let Dean say hello to all of you. Hello, Dean.
Yeah. Hey, hello. Good morning, everyone.
Great to have you here today. So it's a big jump when you go from the safety of a corporate gig to starting your own, particularly when it's not because you have a specific intellectual property that is going to differentiate yourself. You're going to automatically have a new market. In this case, you're kind of wedging yourself into a place that there is a lot of confusion when it comes to creating value in the marketing. And these are conversations that you and I have had about how entrepreneurs sometimes view this whole approach to marketing. So let's talk first about how you made that decision. There had to have been a strong passion there for you to go out and start your own firm.
Yeah, Karen, thanks for having me on. Excited about being on the program. Ironically, I had no interest in owning a firm. I grew up with a father who had his own ad business,
really?
Designer. And, what I remember from that was, being up at night, late nights, all-nighters, trying to hunt and gather. And it just seemed like a lot of work with very little reward, whole lot of stress, always stress in trying to get new business. And you have to be, great at the craft as well as running the business. And my father was great at the craft, probably not as great at running the business. And so, I chose the path of working for someone else, working for some of the best, global agencies in the world. And I did that for, about 16 years. Along the way, met Jenna Keller, who would eventually become my business partner. But 2002, we had just kind of come out of,
Right.
a dot-com crisis, economic crisis that I had not seen in my lifetime. And when you're in a big agency, your role, your importance is really measured by your relationship with clients. But in a big agency, you have a lot of different roles. Some are tied to clients, some are tied to managing practices, some are tied to managing, P&Ls in offices. And those that are not tied to clients those are the ones that are vulnerable. And so for the first time, I felt like I did not have control of my destiny, as experienced I was at that point. And so it was a little more of, push comes to shove. I've got to go take control. And so, I started working on a business plan. Jenna, was feeling in her own office, in her own way, the same kind of pressure, and got together, and she said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I think it's time to go out and do our own thing. And so that was it. Put her name on the business plan with mine, and we went out and started a firm. And that was 2003. Interesting things happen after a crisis, economic crisis. You have a consolidation of the market, right? And for us, what was interesting is that consolidation was happening where we were strongest, which was technology. And so we thought there was a window of opportunity to go out there with a boutique firm with a great technology pedigree, and not necessarily try to go after the largest technology companies, but really go after the emerging companies that are going to come out of the economic crisis, the startups, as well as the middle market brands. And so we were always, and continue to be 17 years later, very realistic on, what our kind of pond is. If a Fortune 500 company wants to call us because they've heard about us, they like our reputation, we've gotten a strong referral, we're more than happy to represent a Fortune 500 company. But where we spend our time and our own marketing is really focused more on emerging and middle market brands. And that, that strategy has, paid off for us.
So when you talk about emerging markets or startups, and let's just dive in on the whole startup council and how that came to pass, because that ended up leading to a number of really prominent companies, right? And so, a lot of times people are afraid to work with startups because they don't have money or invest that time, or I have found my own sort of weakness, if you will, is that I love entrepreneurs. And so I probably have donated too much time to helping entrepreneurs over the years, but it's rewarding to me. And so I do it a lot. And I know you have done it even more so than that. So did it chicken and egg? Was it something because it was this merge of the markets and this consolidation and you saw it was an opportunity? Was it sort of just a heartfelt give back to the community, or was it really actually strategic because you could plant your seeds early and then grow as these companies grow? And then and talk about some examples, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of all of those things, right? And again, back to the point about you got to be really, good at your craft And for us back then, it was primarily public relations, but you also have to know how to run the business. And I think we've been fortunate to build the right kind of team that we could do both very effectively. And so when we created Startup Council, it was in part because we wanted to be around startups. We liked that energy. We liked that disruptive mentality. But we also knew that we had a responsibility to our staff to generate revenue. And so we had to have a diverse portfolio of clients so that we could, in fact, support startups with little to no expectation of revenue in the beginning. And that if we created something like a brand called Startup Council, we could bring others into that fold, other experts like yourself, that could create value, real value for startups, not just us doing it alone, but create real value that ultimately would help everyone who was in Startup Council as consultants gain a reputation as being a advocate for that community. And again, the expectation wasn't that even the companies that would come through Startup Council would in fact hire us. In fact, if you recall, we were pretty clear that this was not a selling environment; it was a consulting environment. And so, that we had that Startup Council for several years. It was for us the beginning of kind of the platform for us to create an ecosystem that today is now built around 6 different brands. Everything from not brands that necessarily that we created like Startup Council, but brands that had a similar mission, like a Tech Alpharetta or an Atlanta Tech Village, Atlanta Tech Angels, Raise Forum, Keiretsu Forum. They all have a similar mission in they're trying to support and foster growth within that startup community. And so that was kind of a natural evolution for us. Winepreneurs, which is the most recent add to that ecosystem, is something that we created and that we run and manage. But once again, we do it with partners who can all kind of take a little bit of the effort in supporting and being collaborative, but also gain the benefit of being, in the community of some of these other startups. And so that was, again, strategic because if you're a startup that's moving quickly, you're trying to scale, we want to be in your consideration set when you're thinking about an agency, in part because we've had success and in part because we've given back without any expectation for or of revenue at that particular time.
Yeah. So I want to kind of jump in on the marketing side and the concept of 360, but I do want to circle back around just for those entrepreneurs that are listening right now. And, this idea that you've been in business 17 years and you, now have achieved this recognition, number 2 in so many different categories. So was it a steady, straight line that you just were really good at managing your cash flow and growing it and being kind of steady on that? The whole industry, the entire economy in the U.S. and in the world had a hiccup in 2009.
Yeah.
So that was sort of like right in the middle, to a certain degree. We're in 2010 and it took us a few years to get out of that. So, some you as partners, running this, describe a little bit about how you have managed the prosperous, the lean, the scary, the uncertainty as you've grown your firm to come out now, number 2 in so many categories, which, is, as you said in your blog, is actually considered number 1, kind of overall.
Yeah. Yeah. So, philosophically, we, from the very beginning, our growth aspirations were very practical. We did not set a goal, let's grow by 30% each year, 40% each year. I think you run the risk of compromises, at least in the professional services side. You can certainly grow that quickly, as a software company, or other types of technology companies and even other industries. But professional services is challenging. You ultimately run the risk of compromise when you set a really aggressive growth. And so we did not want to be greedy. Let's just grow consistently. Let's be profitable. Let's compensate our staff at the industry averages, but then exceed them with things like bonuses and commissions and other incentives that round up the package to be unparalleled. And that has served us in having what we believe is the industry's best retention rate, having lost one person to an agency
I saw that.
17 years in an industry that has a lot of turnover. And so that philosophy of slow and steady, consistent growth has served us well. And then we've made, I think, smart decisions. Other than your staff, your next biggest line item is your lease, your property, where your space is. And when we started, we didn't have WeWork. We didn't have so much, remote workplaces. It was, you had a brick and mortar space, and that was really important. But you could spend a lot of money on a lease being in the right place, the right part of town with the right, aesthetic for your clients. And we felt like those things were important, but we didn't want to lease. And so part of our strategy was to own our space. That allows us to reduce our monthly costs dramatically. And so we owned the space, we expanded that space, we sold that space, we bought a bigger space. And so that was really important for the first 15 years of our business to really kind of control our costs. We're very shrewd in terms of managing, our P&L and staff utilization. Again, in an agency or in professional services, you bill by the hour. People have to hit certain thresholds. And so, if we build the business based on a lower expectation per person, then we have more running room in terms of, exceeding our capacity before we have to staff up. Because what you don't want to do is, you're 15-person shop and you think new business is coming, so you add 3 more people before the business is there, and then the business doesn't come, and now really you only need 12 people instead of 18. We've managed to avoid those kinds of scenarios, so that, we're 15 people and we're maxed. And when we need a 16th, we're going to get a 16th because the business is there, not because we think it's going to be there.
That's a big mistake I think a lot of small businesses make. And even startups, as they're growing, will make that mistake.
And we've also had a shared responsibility model. So we have, since the beginning, we've had one person who is not a billable employee. Now, you can't ask that one person to do everything in terms of office management and finances and things like that. But if you spread some of those responsibilities in a minimal way across the staff, then you can minimize how many, admin people you need, which again benefits your bottom line.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So, okay, so let's get into this idea of the 360 reputation marketing. That was a term that you used, and it was curious to me. Looking at your website, I see, 5 areas of media, and this is where I think a lot of times entrepreneurs and definitely investors, will get confused a lot of times. And I'm sure you've seen it
Yeah.
significantly more than I've even seen it, where people say, oh, we're going to go get they've got this social media strategy, and they don't understand the importance of creating awareness and traditional marketing, advertising, all these kind of things. And so you call it, and I love the way you put this out there on your website. Again, that's trevelinokeller.com. And that's public relations is earned media, social media management is shared media, digital marketing is paid media, demand generation, owned media, which that was an interesting way to describe that, and creative services is mixed media. So talk about this. What does 360 mean? How does that fit together? And what does that mean for your clients? Because, part of your goal or how you approach it is outcome driven.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a lot of industry terms out there. Some overlap. It's easy for it to be confusing, particularly if you go from one agency's website to another agency's, right? And today, there's been a blending, or at least over the last couple of years, there's been a blending of agency services. So it's not so cut and dry, right? A public relations firm that only does public relations is few and far between, or at least in my opinion, that model is limiting. And so we evolved the agency, kind of back to your earlier question about, how did we get to where we are 17 years later? It's because we evolved our capabilities, because we knew years ago that public relations has some limitations in its ability to impact the bottom line. And for our kind of focus on emerging and middle market brands, they don't have the resources to have multiple agencies often. And so they got to make a choice. Which agency do I pick, and where do I invest my dollars? And so we needed to be more than just public relations. We needed to be able to say, yeah, we can impact the bottom line, and we can do that with some other disciplines, right? And so it went from public relations and social media, and then we start looking at digital marketing. Creative services was always an important part of that process, because creative really kind of touches all disciplines. If you think as broadly as you can, even on the public relations side, with the way you package up content. So then we kind of took a step back and thought, well, we really need, the common thread in all of these things is media. And so we thought maybe it'll simplify the message if we just talk about it from a media standpoint. And instead of talking about it from a public relations or a digital marketing, it's media. Media is what people consume, whether it's a consumer or a business, and they make decisions based on that content. And then they get that content from a whole different, number of sources. So that's how we kind of moved to the earned, shared, paid, owned, mixed model. Now, taking a step back from that, there's, for years there have been terms like reputation management, which really kind of falls under, public relations, communications. And then you even had 360 branding or 360 marketing. And we learned some of those things from our global agency days. But no one was really combining reputation and marketing. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Really simple reasons. One, most agencies that are focused on reputation don't have the capabilities on the marketing side. And so they tend to stay within their reputation management community. Most creative agencies, branding agencies, have not invested a great deal on the reputation side. They may have public relations capabilities, but they're not front and center. They're kind of ground cover. And so our approach was put reputation front and center, and then build the other capabilities around marketing, so that ultimately what we're doing is creating the content that reinforces the reputation, but then we're pushing it out to as many different channels as we can through marketing. And that, because we believe that ultimately the consumer or the business decision maker is choosing products and services because they're relying on a third party to tell them this is actually a good product or a good service. Whether that third party is a traditional media outlet, a podcaster that has its own reputation, an analyst, a social influencer, they're all out there for us to associate ourselves with to help build reputation.
Okay, so look, one way, I guess, as you were talking, so 360 is really, a starting point of, in this case, maybe it's a PR piece or something that goes full circle, right? So
Yeah.
that seems so obvious, but, goes full circle through all the other media pieces to come around and encapsulate the idea of trusting a brand or a vendor so that you will do business with them.
Right.
Is that kind of in a nutshell, a way to
Yeah.
sort
So
of
I'll give you an example.
Yeah, use that. Was it Carvana with
Carvana,
the
yeah.
right? Yeah, use that because they were. And did they come out of Startup Council? Is that how you first met them?
No, that they were a little bit later, about 7 years ago. They're Phoenix-based company. They launched in Atlanta.
Okay.
In a very competitive environment in terms of used car sales, and a proposition a selling proposition that had barriers in terms of the consumer's willingness to buy a car online. One of their biggest purchases, other than their home,
Yeah.
to buy that car online and to do it from a company that they'd never heard of. That's a pretty big expectation.
Right.
And so we worked on their initial launch here in Atlanta, and then work to really get kind of proof of concept in this market. And as soon as they began to offer free shipping, or offer to send you an airline ticket for you to go pick up your car anywhere, from anywhere in the country, then they became a national player. And so at that point, our strategy was shifting to go tell this story of a disruptive brand that's going to change the way people buy cars. Go to New York and tell that story. And we knew that once we were able to get the national media, the national business media, ABC World News and CNBC and Wall Street Journal and those kinds of media outlets to begin to cover this company, then we started grabbing that reputation-based content and pushing it out socially, through some paid media, and they began to gain momentum. And so 5 years into it, Forbes identified them as the 5th most promising company in the country. And we used that that reference for a lot of the communication that we put out there. And company has had very smart, very aggressive leadership the whole way. The kind of leadership that makes our job a whole lot easier. They've brought in the right kind of expanded resources, other agency partners that we've worked with over the years. They went public. They become a Fortune 1000 company. Great stock performance. We recently announced their 100th market. And so, very innovative, ideal company to build a 360 reputation marketing program around.
So I want to bring it back into relevance, specifically sort of like a summary moment, if you will,
Sure.
for investors and entrepreneurs, because, so often I see, early stage companies and companies that are struggling to grow because they don't understand the integrated approach to why it's important to not just do some digital media ads, or why not just, or they'll just go, oh, I'm going to go hire a PR firm, and they don't have it connected back in. They're just doing silos of, sort of what you call the 360. There's a pie slice, if you will. And I think it's important for investors, particularly investors that are looking at early stage companies, or investors that are looking at growth stage companies that might be on a Reg A plus or a 506C. So they're raising money on a national basis through General Solicitation. And it's a point that I always try to drive home, that they may not be able to afford all of it now, but they need to be able to have a strategy that says, with this money, we're going to execute this plan that, back to that objective marketing, the outcomes, where is it going to get us? So how does a entrepreneur measure that, or how does an investor look at that to say, is this company, are they putting the pieces in? Because sometimes entrepreneurs just don't know what they don't know. And hopefully they're listening to this podcast or watching this video, and they're like, man, I hadn't really, I should think beyond that. I need to, and it's not all, you told me it's not all, it doesn't all, you work with other companies that do different pieces of the puzzle to bring it all together, kind of like as a quarterback. But what are the telltale signs, if you will, that a company is considering it in the right way or not considering it in the right way?
Yeah. So first thing is you gotta get your brand right. That's critical. And so when we talk to startups, we look at the brand, we look at their positioning in the market. Sometimes they've spent a lot of time and money on that brand, and so we try not to create redundancies in terms of costs. But if there's a barrier to a name, to an identity, to the messaging, then we'll push back a little bit. And it took us a little bit of time to land on messaging for Carvana that was actually resonating. It was not in the first month or the third month. You keep working at that and you keep evolving that positioning. Once you feel good about that, then you just gotta decide what is the primary business objective. Some cases, hey, we need to raise more money. So we may lean more on public relations and earned media to do that. Investors like reading about companies in local media and national media. If the business objective is really more, hey, we've got to get a lead gen funnel going. We have to show that we can get some beta users on board. And so we may decide that maybe what we need more is a organic, social strategy and a little bit of paid before we really push the PR side, right? Or it's levers, right? We may lever up on one area, lever down on another area. We're also big into testing different, if we're going to spend paid media, let's test some things. Let's spend, $1,500 there, $1,500 here. It doesn't need to be crazy investments for us to be able to see if we're getting some traction on different
messaging,
paid tactics. And so I think, as a entrepreneur, as an investor, you have to be open to testing different things in the beginning within that 360 mix, which is why I think it's important to look for a firm that can do a little bit of everything, so that they're not simply recommending the one thing that they do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one of the key things is on the reputation side, and this goes to this idea of creating the trust and the
Yeah,
goodwill, because goodwill is this thing that a lot of people don't really, it's hard to measure, it's hard to really do, but it's brands have goodwill. People have measured like Coca-Cola's brand
yeah,
and the goodwill that it presents, and and it's one of those factors when you look at a balance sheet and there's the tangible assets and there's revenues and there's kind of stuff, but that oomph factor that
yeah,
makes a company, a fund, a private equity fund or a hedge fund or a corporation buy this company over that company, that may have similar dollar financial metrics, but it's the goodwill. It's that
yeah,
reputation that they have in the marketplace. And it's also how they handle crises, right?
yeah,
So we all can look back at big companies that had an unexpected crisis and they had to save their reputation because their reputation got trashed, like
yeah,
Tylenol way back when with the tampering, right?
yeah,
And we've got a whole new thing. We now have to have special hands to open up bottles as a result. It changed an industry because
yeah,
of that, right? But it hit them hard. You've had, there's all kinds of examples of that on the corporate side. And then now how we are dealing in this pandemic crisis, it's, different companies are stepping up and taking proactive measures to show their consciousness, the conscious capitalism side of that, their empathy for their customer, their empathy for the marketplace, whether it's State Farm that is giving a credit back to their customers on auto insurance without them even asking because people aren't driving, or a company like a Dove that is highlighting the beauty of these heroes on the front line and the struggles and the stress and the risks that they're taking, but by announcing that they're taking a percentage of their revenues and putting it towards nonprofit agencies that are providing care for folks. So there's different ways that people organizations approach that. So speak to that idea of the of that trust and how hard it is to create the trust,
yeah.
and then how hard it is to regain it if you lose it, and then what does it mean in a situation like this where companies can choose to bubble up to the top because they've been proactive in doing something that would further their relationships or positive relationships with their employees as well as their customers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, the first thing that any company needs to acknowledge is that at some point or another, they will face a crisis. Whether that crisis is related to specifically to their company, something that they did, a miscue with a product or a service or staff, or whether it's a crisis within their industry that ultimately affects them, or the situation that we face. I don't know, seems like every 30, 40, 50, 100 years, which is a pandemic, right? Or an economic crisis. It's going to come. And so you've got to be thinking about, how you build up some credits in the mind of your constituents. And so I learned early on in my career, one of the better case studies I learned from a guy named Al Golan, who founded Golan Harris and was there with Ray Kroc in 1956 to help him build a brand called McDonald's. And through Al Golan and that agency, they put a great deal of emphasis around corporate social responsibility and community relations. And you had, a rare situation in a brand that became iconic have a second iconic figure associated with it, which was Ronald McDonald. And so that takes a lot to build two iconic brands within the same organization. But they did it, and they were known for how they gave back to local communities. And, 30 or so years ago, we had this thing called the, unfortunate LA riots that destroyed most of the retail within a several mile radius, out of the anger of the riots. Every single McDonald's location within that radius was untouched.
Really?
Every single one, untouched. And that was because even in people's anger, they remembered the commitment and the give back that
Wow.
McDonald's had. And so, you can't find a more powerful example of the importance of corporate social responsibility and community relations. And so, we've always thought about that as we think about our clients, big and small, and what can they do. We've always been, advocates of don't simply give to a big organization and be a small fish within that organization, because you may not get those credits. You may not earn those. They may not be as visible, versus why don't you start your own foundation or come up with your own initiative that has a Ronald McDonald-like brand associated with it. Of course, you're not going to build that kind of brand overnight, and that's perfectly fine. But to build a brand, secondary brand that you can own, that reinforces your corporate social responsibility is a really smart and powerful strategy. We've done our own brands called YouthWorks, and it's focused on staff picking local charities that we can give volunteerism or cash to, even in the smallest way. But it's tied to a theme and a philosophy that if we help young people first and foremost, that's going to make the biggest impact. So that was just our approach, but an example of how you can, regardless of your size, create something that speaks to what you believe in and that's ownable. And then when the crisis does come, people are going to remember that, and they will be, even in a divisive environment that we have today, they will be more forgiving of your brand. Of course, how you then respond, and today we see, how brands are responding to a pandemic in heroic ways, in proactive ways, and it's to some extent, responsibility of agencies like ours to help them come up with an ownable approach to how they can give back.
Yeah, very good. So that's what I really wanted to cover within our podcast and this video today. Anything you'd like to add as part of closing comments?
Just that, I think it doesn't really matter the size of your company. I think everyone has the ability to make an impact. But philosophically, what is important to you? And, hopefully it is more than just generating revenue and growing as fast as you can. That there is some consideration for, how you help your employees progress. We've always thought that client retention was best served by staff retention. So if you can start there, and then, it's all kind of a connected ecosystem, right? This generation, the Gen X, they all have this idea that they want to make a difference. And so leverage that, use those folks you'll keep them longer if you give them an opportunity to also give back and participate in a way that's not just revenue generating. And ultimately, I think it will serve not just the community, but serve your business.
So you are a conscious capitalist yourself, then, I guess.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
Yeah, so very good. So I want to encourage folks again, please go to trevelinokeller.com. And if you're not looking at anything that's written, it's TrevelinoKeller.com. And of course, again, I encourage you to sign up for their newsletter, check out their site, look at their blog. It's very well done. And my information is all at karenrands.co. You can get to my blog, to all of my social media, and all of the ways that we help entrepreneurs that are in various growth stages to get to access to the capital, the resources they need to grow, such as the resources of a Trevelino Keller, and also to get for investors that are looking to do due diligence on companies or get another set of eyes to look through the bigger picture besides the sizzle of whatever a company might be promoting, because there's a lot more meat that needs to be on the bones than just the sizzle, right? We all have seen that. So
yeah.
Thank you very much, Dean, for joining me today. And I hope you and your family and everybody and all of your employees stay safe during this time and stay well.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Karen. Enjoyed the conversation. Have a great day.
Okay, great. Let me